I thought I'd jump on here and just have a little bit of a moment to have a bit of spiritual chat about everything and anything, really. Do you know what? It's really lovely at the moment because it is pouring down outside. We're in the UK, for anybody outside of the UK, and we've been having heat wave after heat wave after heat wave for a number of months now, over the last couple of months. And it's meant that we have the whole sort of environment around us is completely dried out. And I woke up this morning to torrential rain, and it was just the most magical feeling. I don't know if anybody else is like me and gets that real sort of sense of nostalgia and just comfort from hearing the rain outside. Is so relaxing and nourishing. It's just absolutely magical. I do want to go out for a walk, but I'm kind of watching the weather forecast because not only have we got torrential downpour, but a bit of thunder and lightning as well, which I also love. I absolutely love thunder and lightning. I love being inside and hearing the thunder outside. And yeah, so for anybody in the UK, I can well believe that you're probably feeling the same as me. We've been waiting for this, which is really, really, really lovely. The environment's getting what it needs after quite a long time. I also wanted to follow up on a post I made yesterday about surrendering to the flow, because that's something that I'm definitely moving through at the moment. I made a short post a while back about how I've had to sort of block out some of my calendar because we've got an up and coming house move that's going on at the moment. Where we currently live, our landlord had sold the property, and so we had a time frame of when we'll need to move out, but we don't actually have anywhere to move to at the moment. So it's getting to that point of it needs to happen quite soon. And so a lot of my sort of post was in respect of that. There's a few other bits and pieces that I've got going on in the background, and each of them have been sort of chipping away at, when you've got sort of a certain amount of strength to get yourself through different situations, but then sometimes one thing gets on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, and it just chips away at your capacity on all levels. And it kind of got to that place for me. And regardless of how far we are down our spiritual path or how much sort of work we've done on ourselves, and certainly actually when we've done even like more work on ourselves and we've worked through more layers of those healing and sort of overcome that, tends to be that that's when we get into the really nitty-gritty stuff of things that are really challenging. And to some degree, I feel like there's a lot of individuals going through this at the moment, going through the very similar things where we might have like things coming up that are, past memories, past experiences that maybe we felt like we've moved through and overcome, or there's sort of residual aspects of that coming up into our awareness. And it's reflective of something else that we've got going on around us. And I've certainly found that in my own experience. And like I said, possibly, there's others going through the same. So I do feel like we're moving through a big cycle, coming to an end of a major cycle and moving into a new one, which is all going to be positive. But when we're in the midst of it, oh my goodness, it's that sort of real energy of not being able to see the wood for the trees. And I've definitely been there in the last couple of months or so, on a number of levels. So I want people to know that I will be opening up my diary as and when I can be. I've got some availability showing in October and in the months forward, and just putting that sort of complete trust into sort of surrendering. Do you know, when it comes to, especially when it comes to me with the surrendering process, I usually get to the point that, and I know this is the case for many of us as well, where we just have to, when we get to the point that we can't do anything else. And actually there's beauty in that, getting to that space, because when we are in a position when we get out of our own way, that's when shifts can happen. And it could just be a shift in the way that you are approaching whatever's going on around you, or it could be a shift in the actual physical situation that's going on around you. It's that real sense of let go and let God. And I just came out of the back of a incredible reading that I just did for a client. It was just so, the connection was incredible with her loved one in spirit. And again, it really re-emphasized that space of what happens when we completely allow the connection to take place rather than trying to make it take place. Because when it comes to mediumship, it is a lot to do with that letting go, surrender, trust, faith, and actually, I've said it to so many of my clients, and I've probably said it in previous videos, that in the past I used to be such a worrier. I could write novels about things I worry about, and I found it such a comfort zone to be in that cycle of worrying that it became my autopilot to things going on in my life. So if I didn't have anything that I was worrying about when I was in that cycle, it would almost be like I would oddly create scenarios to worry about. Um, and then as I sort of lent into doing what I do now and moving through the path of having, challenges happening a couple of years ago, where again I had to sort of surrender to. I was in a sort of work environment that just wasn't working out at the time. I'd had a number of different health diagnoses that I was moving through, and things were just falling apart at the seams. And I got to the point where I just had to sort of take my hands off the steering wheel. And when I did, things just completely rapidly shifted for me. And I was able to sort of step in to really focus on what I'm doing now. And with that came the dedication of, okay, if I'm going to do this work, then I've really got to work on myself. That's got to take place. I've got to jump on that sort of bandwagon. Because for me, to be able to step into this space and hold space for others comes with me needing to respectfully acknowledge that I need to be in a state of equilibrium within myself to do that. And so I'd put a lot of focus and emphasis on my own development, my own, shadow work, whatever the case may be, whatever title you want to give it. And I've done a lot of that in the last couple of years. And I think this is why this situation that jumped up recently with lots of different things going on around me, it's almost like it took a double blow, because you feel like you've come so far and then you get all this stuff sort of falling apart again. And the first sort of human sort of ego reaction is, what have I done wrong in that sort of mindset? But looking back to sort of where I'd sort of come from, when I went through the process of, all this self-development back then, I got to a space where, and I'm still very much in that space. So like I said, it really knocked me off path the other day, because it was odd for me to feel these sensations that I was feeling, this self-blame, this self-criticism, this concern, this worry, this anxiety, because that's something that I've not experienced much in the past few years, because I got to a space where when you do this work, specifically like mediumship or working with spirit, or in whatever capacity that may be, it may be even just an individual practice that you have in your own life, and you get to that space where you are fully trusting that there is something behind the scenes that is taking care of the bigger picture, or supporting us through the unfolding of the bigger picture, because they don't do it all for us. They may give us intuitive insights and we can take inspired action from that, but there certainly is something behind the scenes that is helping us navigate things. We're not completely on our own. And when I got that awareness, and this came through my work, it really just helped to alleviate that sort of worry and stress that I was experiencing before. And thankfully, I'm leaning back into that space again. I'm not, as much as I've still got lots of different challenges and things going on around me, and that is a struggle to sort of move through. That sort of fear and that worry that was coming with it, that's less so now, which is really reassuring. Because it just alleviates the extra stress of what you're moving through. And so, the surrender process is an interesting one, because it's the one that so many of us struggle with, understandably, because we are built to exist and rely on the external in this reality that we live in, because we've been kind of conditioned from a young age to believe that we need to take action to receive an outcome on a situation. And as I said, yes, there are certain situations where we take inspired action, but a lot of the action that we've been taking throughout our lives is that sort of belief of I need to do this for survival. So we've all been in that survival mode, that fight or flight. There's so many people that are moving through, myself included, burnout, nervous system, sort of recovery, everything like that. There's so much focus on, nervous system regulation and fascial work, and it's amazing, and I'm not discounting it because it is so necessary for us in our individual experiences to take care of our nervous system, to take care of our lymphatic system, our fascial system. But it's interesting, isn't it, that we're having to do so, because that, interestingly, should be a system that takes care of itself. We shouldn't have to necessarily regulate it. It's become dysregulated because of the environment that we live in and have been conditioned to live in throughout our life. We've been in survival mode because we've been going against the natural flow and order of how things should be from a spiritual perspective. And going against that flow is automatically going to create dysregulation in our system. There's going to be moments where we have like stress in our lives, and some stress is actually good for us, that it can be healthy, but too much stress is what causes the dysregulation. And this is what's happened in our environment, is we've been put into a stressed state from such a young age. And this could be at different levels, stressed about our achievements and wanting to achieve, good grades when we're at school, stressed about sort of having social interactions and, making friends, and will I get on with people, and do I look okay, and how does my hair look, and what do I say to this person, and what do they think of me, and all these different things, all these different factors that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And as time's gone on, it's got worse because we've got the aspect of social media that's come into play. And with social media, you have that sort of, nothing's as it seems on camera. There's so much more that's said behind the scenes than what we see, but when we are waking up, jumping on our devices, looking at all these different social media influencers, and we're automatically training our brain to have some aspect of like an inferiority complex. And so, but we're unintentionally doing that because it's just there in our face. And so we've consistently built ourselves to be, unknowingly, in an environment where we're in fight or flight. And so it's really recognizing that's more of us. And it's another factor which is really, really interesting that I've sort of noticed quite a lot recently is when you look at sort of the neurodivergent community, beautiful community of neurodivergent individuals. And a lot of people at the moment are moving through a process of diagnosis, and specifically, late diagnosis in life, because there's been a lot of elements that have come to awareness where people are recognizing that they may have aspects of neurodivergence within themselves that wasn't readily available because they were masking what their struggles were to fit into the society. So again, it's that fight or flight aspect. How am I going to show up? How do I approach the world? What has this person told me that I need to do so that people are more accepting of me in the environment that I'm in? And so the way I started to look at it, and certainly it is evident in the neurodivergent community, that there's a vast amount of masking that takes place. But I also feel that there's a huge amount of masking that takes place in the majority of society when we look at ourselves from a level of authenticity, because where we've been in that state of fight or flight survival mode, we aren't presenting ourselves authentically. Not everybody, there are some incredible individuals out there who are authentic to the core. And really, I feel that right now that's what we're moving through. It's more and more people are leaning into that awareness that, and this is coming from that sort of acknowledgement of, hitting sort of energy, states of burnout, and moving through our nervous system regulation, working with our fascia, working with our lymphatic system, bringing our body into a state of balance, and then becoming aware that we have always been in that fight or flight, in that survival mode, and in that space of not leaning into our authenticity. So we're going to see more and more people stepping into that power, stepping into that awareness, and becoming more authentic in their own skin. And this is what's going to bring a shift and change over the next few years. This is why we're seeing more systems shift and change, and crumble apart. And it's beneficial because it's part of the process of things moving forward. I recognize that when I was in the companies I used to work for, and I knew that I wanted to be part of something that could shift things moving forward, but I recognized that that couldn't happen if I stayed in the environments that were still serving the structures that have been in place. And so there's more and more people that are stepping up in that way, whether it's sort of intentionally or inadvertently. But there's big changes coming, and I feel like that's why there's many of us at the moment going through this process of lots of more stuff coming up, when you may have felt like you've dealt with it all. Maybe this is the point of me wanting to talk about this, is I felt I dealt with a lot. I felt like I dealt with a lot of stuff that had come up and was moving through my system, and I'd overcome the majority. And with any sort of healing process, none of it's linear, and it all happens when we're strong enough and capable enough to overcome what we're moving through. But I thought I dealt with a lot, that I would be not done, but had reached a point that I wouldn't be as reactive as I was to the things that have come up recently. And so again, like I said, I do feel like this is a collective shift that we're going through. So if you're moving through anything that feels like things are coming up to the surface again, could be sort of old memories coming up to the surface, old anxieties, old wounds, old traumas. It does feel like it's very collective, like a collective energy of closing out an old cycle to welcome in a new. So my answer to that, I guess, at the moment is to just keep moving forward and just allow yourself to move into that state of surrender, and support yourself through that process, through that nervous system regulation, through your sort of fascial release, through working with your lymphatic system, whatever it is. When we sort of look at when we're trying to sort of anchor in and regulate ourselves into our physical being more, what we do find is that any density that is sort of keeping us in that sort of lower state that we've been in has got to rise to the surface, got to go somewhere. So sometimes these emotions, these wounds, everything that's coming up is not coming up because it's holding us back, or sort of is something that's saying, oh, well, actually we've not come along as far as we thought we had done. But it's actually coming up because it's moving. It's not, a observation of, oh, well, maybe I haven't moved forward as far as, I felt I'd done, or maybe I haven't done enough work. And that can automatically come with that sort of manner of self-criticism. But sometimes it's coming up because it's moving through the system and moving through our awareness. And through that awareness, it's just having that awareness, but allowing it to move. Interestingly, when we have like really, really heavy emotions, and when I have very heavy emotions, I allow them to be. A lot of us can sort of, again, this can be sort of considered the environment that we've been in, but a lot of us try and distract ourselves away from the emotions and sort of try and sugarcoat it, or put our head in the sand, or try and do something to distract it, whatever the case may be. But I find that when I allow myself to just feel the emotions with no judgment and just observe them, similar to when we're sort of in meditation and we've got thoughts that come up, and if we pay attention to the thoughts, more thoughts will appear. It's that awareness. But when we have that observation of the emotions that are coming up with no judgment, no expectation, no desire to change them, just allow them to be, they move. And it's very much like that flowing river energy. They just move because we're allowing them to do so, all we're noticing in that moment is the awareness that they're coming up in our system. And again, like I said, it could bring those sort of past memories up, those past traumas, those past wounds, but just allow them to be. No judgment, no criticism, just that observation. And that's when the alchemization, that's when the alchemy happens, and you get yourself to a space where they just move, and they clear through your system, and you find yourself back into that state of equilibrium again. And that in itself brings through nervous system regulation. That in itself supports the flow. Often when it comes to a lot of this work or walking a spiritual path, a lot of it's easier than a lot of people let it on to be believed. But yeah, I feel like I needed to share that message today, because I feel like there's more people than just myself moving through this desire or need to surrender at the moment, and it could be for many different reasons. But I feel like we're going through a collective shift, and this collective shift, I feel like, is that closing out of an old cycle to welcome in a new. And this could be why it might be feeling particularly heavy for you right now. So keep doing what you're doing. Surrender to the flow, surrender to the process. Don't try and force yourself upstream, because all we're doing when we sort of force ourselves in a sort of shape that doesn't feel comfortable to us is we're just creating more of that, more of that fight or flight, more of that dysregulation. Do what feels good to you in that moment, and sometimes that's just doing nothing and just being, because when we're being, we're in that state of flow and that state of surrender. And it is scary because we've been conditioned to be in a state of doing. But the more that we allow ourselves to get into that space, trusting that there is something behind the scenes that is supporting us through the process, and that there is a plan, even if we can't see it, the easier the path forward and ahead of you gets. I hope that helps, guys. Take care.